A new bill in Congress, the Second Amendment Restoration Act of 2025, H.R. 6035, aims to repeal key gun control measures from the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. In recent years, federal initiatives have expanded background checks for young adults, promoted red flag laws, and increased funding for programs that many believe disadvantage law-abiding gun owners. This bill seeks to reverse that trend. In this overview, I will explain what the 2022 law changed, what the new bill would undo, what would remain, and the implications for gun owners and related businesses. Let's review the developments since 2022. Following several high-profile shootings, particularly in schools, Congress faced significant pressure to act. Lawmakers from both parties negotiated the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which President Joe Biden signed in June 2022. While promoted as a balanced compromise between mental health and school safety funding and new gun regulations, the law introduced changes that directly affected gun owners. The law addressed three main areas expanding mental health and community programs, particularly in schools: revising federal gun laws through Title II, which introduced new offenses and altered background checks for individuals under 21, and providing grants for school safety and security. While the public focus was on counseling and security, the firearm provisions have had the most direct impact on gun owners. Start with what changed for younger buyers. Before this law, an 18, 19, or 20-year-old walking into a gun shop went through the same instant check as everyone else. After the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the system was told to dig deeper into anyone under 21. The background check is no longer just a quick run through a database. It can pull juvenile criminal records, certain mental health adjudications, and information from local law enforcement about the buyer's past. That means more delays while agencies respond, more chances for someone to say, "We're not sure," put this on hold, and more denials based on records that were never meant to follow you into adulthood. The federal government cites this as a success, noting hundreds of additional denials and a roughly 25% increase in denials for that age group. Officially, this is described as keeping guns out of dangerous hands. However, 18-year-old adults who can vote, sign contracts, and serve in the military now face extra requirements to purchase a firearm from a dealer. Another significant aspect is funding. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act allocated about $750 million to state crisis intervention programs. States may use these funds to establish or expand red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders. These laws allow courts to temporarily remove firearms from individuals deemed dangerous. In some jurisdictions, firearms may be seized based on limited evidence, sometimes before the gun owner has a chance to respond in court. Right now, about 20 states, plus Washington, D.C., have some form of red flag law, and more proposals are introduced every legislative session. The federal government didn't formally order anyone to pass those laws, but it did offer a massive pot of cash to state legislatures and say, if you build something that fits this template, there's money waiting. That's why so many gun owners call this bribery. You don't have to send marshals to the state house if you can just send grant applications and let the money do the pushing. The administration also created a national resource center to help train judges, law enforcement agencies, and officials in the use of these red flag tools. So you have a federal law that funds the playbook, the training, and the enforcement, and then everyone in Washington shrugs and says, it's just local control. Meanwhile, people who have never been charged with a crime are waking up to their doors being kicked in, their property hauled away under a civil order, and a promise that they can try to get their rights back later if they can afford the fight. Layer that money machine on top of the enhanced background checks, and you start to see the pattern. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act doesn't look like a national gun registry bill on its face, and there are still lines in federal law that say, no registry. But when you expand what gets pulled into the background check system and pay states to build red flag pipelines that tap into those same records, you are building a bigger, more detailed picture of who owns what and who can be targeted. It's an architecture that always leans toward more control and less trust in law-abiding citizens. That's the landscape the Second Amendment Restoration Act of 2025 H.R. 6035 is stepping into. This bill was introduced by Representative Wesley Hunt from Texas, and its official purpose is straightforward repeal the firearm-related provisions of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act and put federal gun law back where it was before the 2022 deal. It doesn't try to erase every dollar of mental health or school safety funding. It goes straight after the parts of the law that hit gun owners and due process the hardest. So what would it actually do if it passed first? It would repeal Title II of the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, that entire firearms section. The enhanced background check rules for under 21 buyers would be gone. The new federal gun trafficking and straw purchasing offenses created by that act would be rolled back to the way those crimes were handled before. The grant language tying federal funds to crisis intervention programs would be repealed, so Washington would no longer be in the business of paying states to stand up red flag systems. Second, the bill targets a quieter piece that many people have never heard of. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act also amended federal education law so certain school-related funds couldn't be used to provide a dangerous weapon or training in the use of a dangerous weapon. In plain English, it made it harder for school districts to use some federal dollars for armed security or serious defensive training. H.R. 6035 strikes that language. It doesn't force any school to arm teachers or hire more armed officers, but it takes the federal thumb off the scale so local communities can make those decisions without Washington tying their hands with funding rules. Third, the bill revises the U.S. Code and tells key sections, including portions of 18 U.S.-922 and related grant statutes, to revert to the exact wording they had before the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act rewrote them. For you and me, that means the rules dealers and buyers had lived under for years would come back into force, without the extra layers added in 2022. It's not a brand new gun code. It's a reset to the status quo before this last compromise. Here's something that matters a lot strategically. This restoration bill does not touch the large pools of money set aside for mental health services, community programs, and general school safety initiatives, those billions of dollars for counselors, treatment, and generic safety upgrades stay on the books. That knocks the legs out from under the talking point that these crazy gun people want to do nothing. Supporters of H.R. 6035 can honestly say, we're leaving the mental health funding in place. We're leaving school safety money in place. We're just not going to let Washington use law-abiding gun owners as the permanent scapegoat. All of this is happening in a new legal environment. In 2022, the Supreme Court decided New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, and the majority made it clear if the government wants to regulate guns, it has to point to a historical tradition of similar regulation in this country. You can't just say public safety and call it a day. Many modern red flag frameworks, especially those that let judges issue orders without the gun owner present, have a hard time fitting that test. You're taking someone's arms and ammunition based on predictions and accusations, not on a criminal conviction or even a criminal charge. More recently, the Supreme Court weighed in on United States v. Rahimi, a case about when someone under a domestic violence-related order can lose their gun rights. The court tried to draw lines around who can be temporarily disarmed and when. But even in that conversation, you can see how sensitive it is when the government uses civil orders to do what looks and feels like criminal punishment. For many people in the gun rights world, that's exactly the concern with wide-open red flag laws. You're inviting Fourth Amendment problems, searches and seizures, and Fifth Amendment problems. Taking liberty and property without full due process, all under the banner of prevention. That's why bills like the Second Amendment Restoration Act matter. Even if they face long odds, they're not just about one funding stream or one subparagraph in a statute. They're about pulling federal law back toward the Constitution as it's actually being applied right now. They're about saying, if you want to take away someone's guns, you charge them, you prove it. You give them the full protections of the system. You don't quietly build workarounds with grant money and new background check tricks. We must also be honest about the politics. A bill starts in Congress, goes to committee, has to get out of committee, pass the full House of Representatives, survive the Senate, where anything pro-gun usually needs 60 votes to beat a filibuster, and then make it to the president's desk. Right now, there's a real chance this bill never gets a floor vote in the Senate, and if it did, it would face a veto threat. But that doesn't mean it's pointless. A bill like H.R. 6035 forces politicians to show their cards. It draws a line and says, you either think these gun control provisions from 2022 should stay, or you think they've gone too far and should be rolled back. It builds a blueprint that can be picked up again if and when the balance of power in Washington changes. It also sends a signal to the bureaucracy that gun owners are not going to sit quietly while every crisis gets used as an excuse for more permanent control. For gun owners watching this, that means a couple of things. First, you're not imagining it if you feel like the system has been tilted against you since 2022. The law changed. Background checks changed. The flow of federal money changed. Second, bills like the Second Amendment Restoration Act are one way to push back, but they're not magic. They require pressure, phone calls, emails, and town hall questions, so your representative and senators know this matters to you. Third, even while we fight to fix federal law, we have to stay locked in at the state level, because that's where most of these red flag schemes actually live. In other words, this bill is a test of whether Congress is willing to start undoing bad gun policy, not just piling new layers on top, and of whether we're going to demand that our elected officials restore what should never have been bargained away in the first place. That's it for today's breakdown of the Second Amendment Restoration Act. If you found this helpful, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with another gun owner. Drop a comment with your thoughts on H.R. 6035. Stay safe, stay ready, and stay free.